Okay, thank you. So I teach this behavior course in the summer, and I feel really confident on talking about the big picture of a lot of topics. Like, here's what a behavior plan is, why we get to function, the different functions of behaviors. But when it comes to talking about dealing with behaviors on an everyday, daily basis, is not where I personally shine. I taught in a closet with Ginevra here. She and I taught together in a closet, literal closet. And classroom management is not quite the same in that way. I built a lot of really great relationships, but I never had this experience of managing multiple behaviors or in a large classroom or in traditional setting. And so I don't feel that I perhaps am the best one to tell my students who will be in lots of different settings what to do and how it looks like in all the different areas. So I'm inviting you all because you are all the experts and have lots of different experience in different areas. And so with that, I think we should start with some introductions. And I'm going to have Patrick, if you could introduce yourself and give us a little bit of background on your current position or your scope of work for the past years. That'd be great.
Well, real quickly, um, started out in deaf education. So I went to my master's is in education from Seattle University, and I went to Teachers College Columbia on a fellowship. So that was fun. I learned a lot about deaf ed for sure. Moved to Portland, Oregon as a teacher, then went up to Seattle as a supervisor. And then I moved to Los Angeles and worked in the LA County schools, which is a very, very large school or county operated program in the country. Worked as a principal there for several years. Then went to a little district in you probably have heard of Knott's Berry Farm and Disneyland. So I was there, but also as a SELPA director, which means is that 7 districts went together to provide services as an umbrella to all the kids. From there, I went to the state and was state director of special education for several years. After that, I went to a little district across the river in West Sacramento and started working as an assistant superintendent, but eventually worked up into a superintendency. Um, and did work there for 10 years. Went to Michigan, worked for the Department of Education there on low performing schools. They basically gave me Detroit Public Schools. So that was one of the best experiences I had because I was pretty much the only white guy there and just learned more than I thought I knew. So then I've been at UOP just doing part-time things for the last 4 years and teaching curriculum and instruction and supervising teachers.
Thank you, Patrick. I'm going to take it over to Tracy because the Michigan thing, I think, lit a little bell there.
Well, Patrick, you're a tough act to follow with the
Oh,
different
no,
believe me,
that
I'm not.
you have had.
But I did start my career in the state of Michigan. I did my undergraduate degree at the University of Michigan in elementary and early childhood education. And so I taught in the state of Michigan as primarily a kindergarten teacher for 5 years. And during that time, I was the gen ed side of a co-taught kindergarten classroom. And our classroom quickly became kind of known as the behavior focused kindergarten. A lot of the kids who did kindergarten twice were in my section of kindergarten. And then I moved from the Ann Arbor area, which is beautiful and gorgeous if you know it. Lots of fun, lots of culture, to the middle of Tennessee, to a very different type of setting and culture, very rural. And during that time period, I transitioned from elementary to high school and from gen ed into special education. So I went from teaching kind of for 5-year-olds to 17, 18-year-olds. They were looking for a reading teacher specifically at the high school level. And so I did my master's while I was in Tennessee in special education and taught at the high school level for about 8 years. Primarily, uh, math
was kind of, even though I was hired to teach reading, they realized I could also teach math. So I taught pull-out geometry and algebra. And one of the best parts of my teaching career is I co-taught biology for 6 of those years with the same teaching partner, which was really a
Mhm.
rare occurrence that we actually had to really advocate for ourselves that we wanted to stay teaching partners. During that time, I was also the PBIS, so school-wide positive behavior intervention and supports facilitator. Um, in Tennessee, they had separated that from the academics, and then I also served as the RTI, so response to intervention coordinator, which every state has its own spin on multi-tiered systems of supports and what they call it. And I was department chair as well. So oftentimes as teachers, we take on lots of multiple roles. And so I transitioned out of that position into a funded PhD position at the University of Oklahoma and did my PhD focused on special education, but particularly the transition from
Mhm.
public school settings into post-secondary settings, and also on applied behavior analysis. So I'm also a board certified behavior analysis doctoral level. And now I serve as an associate clinical professor at the University of Connecticut. And
Mm.
so I teach courses in our undergraduate program, our integrated bachelor master program, and then I also teach graduate level courses in special education. And 2 years ago, I took on the role of director of our teacher certification program for college graduates. So it is an accelerated master's program. And so I teach courses primarily now focusing on behavior supports, assessment, and then a little bit of research in there. So
Is that
thanks.
all? Oh my
Oh,
gosh.
wait, hold on. She's missing one thing. She's also the president of, you got to
Oh, yes.
say.
Sorry. I am currently serving on the presidential line for the Division on Career Development and Transition, which is part of the Council for Exceptional Children. I'm in year 3 of the presidential term, so it's my active role as president, and the next year I'll serve as past president. And just a plug for CEC and the subdivisions in general, I highly recommend any teacher get involved. There's lots and lots of supports at multiple levels, and there's a division for everybody, um, from complex support needs to behavior to transition to autism. So that's my little plug for CEC. And are your students getting ready to student teach, Belkis?
This is the very beginning of their program. So, I mean, yes, they will be. Yeah.
So the year that they student teach, as long as this program continues, they get a year of free membership.
Mm.
Right.
So it does not have to be special ed focused. It can be any student teacher. So definitely look into that. So to be honest, they don't check, but you could only get 1 year. So if you really want to join now, they're not going to check to see if you're student teaching, but they'll only give you 1 year of free membership. But that's pretty huge.
That's huge. Yeah.
Yeah. So all right,
Thank
I will
you.
stop talking now.
All right. I'm going to bring it over to Robin.
All right, yes, two very two very highly acclaimed people to follow. Again, my name is Robin Suttle, and this is my 24th year in education. I spent the first 17 years with Lodi Unified as a teacher. I taught mild mod, general education, and moderate to severe. I then moved on to be a TOSA, supporting new teachers in the district. I did that for a couple of years before I moved into my all-time favorite position, which was a principal at our version of an NPS, non-public school.
Mhm.
We were a therapeutic school in Lodi. It's still there. So kids with really that were on the track, weren't making it in comprehensive school, didn't want to quite go to NPS, and so we were that middle ground, and it was wonderful. So needless to say, I love behavior. I love behavior, and we'll get into that. So I was a principal for 4 years, with Lodi as well. So I was with Lodi for about 21 years or so. And then I transitioned over to San Mateo Foster City, where I was a special ed coordinator there. Very litigious, kind of away from the kids, but still able to support teachers, in as far as behaviors and some of those kind of higher level needs go. And now this year, after being in San Mateo Foster City for 2 years, I've now transitioned over to Fairfield Sassoon School District, where I'm now the assistant director of special education. So I'm learning the ropes here, and I'm very excited. And I love special education, and again, I love behavior. So I'm excited for this panel.
Thank you, Robin. And then last but definitely not least is Ginevra Thomas, or as I knew her, Ryan. She was Ryan for a very long time.
I know it sounds weird for to hear you say Thomas, and I was like, oh yeah, Thomas, not Ryan. Yeah, so I started teaching. I did alternative certification, DC teaching fellow. So I started teaching in Washington, DC, and I began my career at Youth Services Center. So that's the Juvenile Detention Center in Washington, DC, and I taught there for a couple years, and then I my master's in curriculum instruction with a focus on literacy, and shifted to teaching at a bilingual multicultural high school with Belkis. And following that, went again to grad school to study education policy and management, which led me to where I am now, Texas. And so I worked for 8 years here in Texas in a suburban school district, Richardson ISD, right outside of Dallas, as a special education coordinator. And so in that role, I worked as an area coordinator, so supporting K-12 schools in one feeder pattern, and then worked towards supporting our literacy intervention primarily, which of course came with inevitably behavior as well, of course, supporting our literacy intervention teachers. And then then I'm trying to think, working most recently I worked in a lot of our systems and data, kind of like Tracy said, when I actually did math when I taught at Youth Services Center, even though it hadn't been a focus of mine, when it was something they found out that I was willing and able to do, was something I did. So the same with our systems in special education in this district. And now I'm really excited to be EDD, a doctoral student with the Elevate Transition Fellowship. My cat, I'm sorry, she's trying to peek in here. Like she's rubbing against the camera. But yeah, so now I'm currently a doctoral student. So it's a very exciting time for me.
All right. I will also say Ginevra gave the best line that I think about all the time. You were in charge of Child Find one year for your district. And when we talked, she's like, I'm going to go find these children. And she found those children, which was the best line. Nobody ever says, I'm going to go find them. They're usually just worried about counting them, which is the best. All right. So for the rest of our time, I'm going to throw out some questions, and they are the questions I sent to you in general. But from here, if you want to add, jump in. There is no like first you, then others. And we're just going to talk out some of your experiences and some of your advice. And to remember that these are students they're grad students. So they're not just fresh out of college. Typically, they have some experience either already in the school systems as paras, as aides, as perhaps they've been working as teachers in non-public schools, but they're getting their credential. And then there also are some students who are complete career switchers. This is a kind of a big trend for us, people who are coming in from like completely different sectors into education. And so kind of a mix of knowledge, but it's a great time to share your experiences. So we're going to start with the first, and this is something that's really big in my teaching practice, at least at the university level. I think a lot about what do I wish I knew that first year, and that I never want my students to have to go around guessing or feeling like they didn't know. So this is like the big one for me. When you first started in your classroom, what was your approach to classroom management, and what do you wish you actually knew to do? So anybody who wants to jump in, you are welcome to.
Well, this isn't really behavior management, but it kind of works into it. I started out as a teacher of the deaf. And like I said before, I trained in New York, and this is in Portland School, Portland, Oregon. It was a private school. And I remember I was scared to death. And about 2 days before the classes started, a couple of the kids drifted into the room. And I remember talking to them and getting acquainted with them. But what I really felt is that it gave me comfort. And then, so I'm trying to push that along for teachers now. Is the best thing you can do is develop a relationship with your students. And if out of the growth out of that means is that you respect kids and kids respect you. And in order to do that, you have to really understand more about the child other than their academic role. So what they did over the weekend, who they're involved with, what they're like, what they don't like. So I play that up with teachers a lot of saying, before you start the lesson in math, why don't you ask them, how was your weekend? What's happening? And then kind of talk about what we're going to do today. I think the more groundwork that you lay there, I think you have fewer behavior problems.
Patrick?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that, Patrick. I think from my work in behavior, and I specifically rely on the therapeutic school I was at, we spent so much time just getting to know the kids and teaching them for the procedures, and we did that through relationship building and teaching the procedures, but there was never anything that was negative or punishable, because so many of these kids that are coming to us, they've already had negative behavior experiences. They already see you as someone who's not going to like them or have issues with them. And when you can reframe that for them, you can find anything positive to say, anything. So when you're able to start with that, and my role was always, I give 10 positives for every negative,
Sure.
right?
Mhm.
So you're going to get to know me as a person. I'm going to get to know you as a person, and we're going to build some trust together, that I'm looking out for you, and that I have your best interest at heart, and that I care about you. And we want our students to authentically feel that before we start putting these big demands on them.
Good. I agree.
Yeah, and I think, coming from the lens of a gen ed teacher first, so it was like very much big whole class management and teaching kindergarten. I had two sections of kindergarten because we did a 2.5 day structure. So between my two classrooms, roughly 50 kindergarten students. That's a lot of kids to manage, and it can be daunting and overwhelming, and you're going to get advice from other classroom teachers. Some are going to be veteran classroom teachers. Some are going to come from an admin lens about what is the quote unquote best approach to classroom management. And so things that I saw and that still exist. I'm going to say no judgment, but a little bit of judgment, like the clip charts, like red, yellow, green, which is really kind of based foundationally on kind of public displays of shame, to be honest, as opposed to a visual reminder of where you are with your own behavior. And so I never did a clip chart in my classroom because it never sat well with me, but I did try a lot of different approaches. And so I would definitely give a beginning teacher the advice of being willing to try different things and bringing the students into that conversation about, we're going to try this method, whether it's sticker charts, whether it's a whole class marble jar, like different things that are built on like group contingencies or individual contingencies when we're talking about behavior. And what ended up working for me in kindergarten is I was a really literacy focused classroom. We did lots of read alouds. We did lots of play with words. And if you know Kevin Hankey's Lily and the Purple Plastic Purse, I'm not sure if I got the title right, but it's basically the premise of this little mouse who gets this purple plastic purse that makes noise. She's so excited to show it off at school. And she basically keeps opening it, and the teacher's like, you can't do that right now, like stop. And eventually what happens is her teacher takes away the purple plastic purse, and she's just devastated, and she draws this really ugly picture of her teacher because he's mean because he took away her purple plastic purse. And at the end of the day, he gives her purse back, and in her purse is a note that says, today was difficult, tomorrow will be better. And so, as a true like kindergarten teacher, I made Lily slips. And when things were difficult, we talked through why they were getting a Lily slip, and it said like, today was difficult, tomorrow will be better. And when they went home and they had a conversation with their family about why today was a difficult day and how tomorrow is going to be better. So kind of piggybacking off of Robin and Patrick, what they said with relationships, depending on the age and grade level that you're teaching, involving families can be a great strategy to help support success in the classroom. And also sending out the message that things can be difficult at school one day, but they don't have to be difficult forever, and that tomorrow is a fresh start. Now, I will say when I moved to high school, Lily slips were not going to work. And so I definitely changed my approach to classroom management. Definitely relationally, that's kind of the focus, but also involving students in the development of any sort of class expectations, building a behavior contract, a class contract. So those are some other strategies too that I'm sure your professor is going to go over throughout the course of the semester.
Um, Jennifer, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was gonna, I mean, obviously agree about the relationship building piece, but when you say like when I first started in the classroom, it calls to mind. I had like a teacher, I think she was like a coach the first, since it was alt start, who would come and observe me. And I remember she told me, because the students in juvenile detention had a lot of personal questions about me. And she told me to essentially redirect them all the time. Like that's literally, she wrote on a post-it note. She was like, just repeat this. That's not relevant to today's lesson. And she was my coach. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna try this strategy. I mean, personally, I felt it was horrible. It didn't work. And then we had a veteran teacher, speaking of learning from your peers, your colleagues, and she was a grandma, and she was always talking about her kids in football, her family, her sons. And I was like, okay, that obviously, like, I don't know what my coach was thinking, but this is what I want to do. And so I had, especially in juvenile detention, a lot of um, students coming and returning recidivism. And so I had a about me that every now and again, if there were like so many kids in the class were new, I was like, pop that up on the screen and share about myself, like family photos and things like that. And honestly, that was probably the biggest hook I had. Students would come back and they would remember things about like that my mom was a social worker or my brother was in the army, and they had a connection even coming back. And I also, which seems silly, but like little things, like I would keep all of my folders in juvenile detention because there was a lot of recidivism. So when they came back, I would always have named folders for all of them, and I would check the rosters in the morning, and if a kid came back, I pulled out their folder. And just seeing like, oh, you remembered me, you have my folder, was surprisingly really like meaningful for them, because everyone else was like, I don't want to deal with like there's so many students and there is so much movement. But that, like, those little cues around relationship I found were really meaningful. And surprisingly too, stickers. I know Tracy said it varies, and it does, but I have smelly stickers, and they like loved the smelly stickers. I mean, maybe it's just like the novelty of it, but even in juvenile detention, and I think maybe especially there, because I will say it goes back to like every day being a new day and that family connection piece, because I would stay and talk to parents after they visited with their children during visitation, and I would say how well they were doing in school. And I mean, so often they would say that's not what we hear in their regular typical school settings. And so, a lot of factors obviously at play there, but it was great to be able to share, no, they are really doing really well here. And that also, of course, like you said, that family connection contributed to the relationship.
Thank you. That's great. That actually, it also kind of leads into the next one here. So I'm putting the questions in the chat. I should have mentioned that in case you need to look at them. Oh,
Can
go
I,
ahead.
I can just comment on her?
Yeah, of course.
So a couple of things came to mind, and this is really, again, behavior related, but abstractly. I always say to teachers when they talk to or a parent, and when the kids come home from school, they say, parent says, "What'd you learn today?" And most of the kids say, "What?" Nothing.
I say nothing.
So what I did as the principal, I had the teachers stop about half hour before the end of school and tell the kids what they learned today. So when they went home, they had something to tell the parents, and the parents thought, wow, they're really learning a lot in this school. So it's a little trick, but it kind of goes along with the fact, even with discipline, what went wrong today and how'd you fix it? When she mentioned that she works with, the family and fixing things with that. the parents sooner or later know that the kid is having a behavior problem. So if he can start saying what was it and how we fixed it, it might be helpful as well.
Yeah. Thank you. And that I think this leads really well into the next one. So in your experience as a classroom, what would have been your must-have routines or procedures that you have this in place and without it, you're going to end up with more issues than not. So like, what routines or procedures do you put in, always make sure that you do that are going to help you prevent some of those big behavioral challenges? Tracy?
Sure. Well, and it may feel cliche, but it's actually super, super true. But the more organized and ready you are to
Mhm.
teach, and when I say ready to teach, I mean everything from you have extra pencils that are sharpened, you have plenty of materials. If you're working on an activity that involves some sort of like photocopied something, that you have at least two extra copies, because inevitably someone's going to ruin their copy and need a new one. To you really understanding the material you're going to teach, because one of the I think the best things you can do as a teacher is be well prepared to teach your content, because a well-designed lesson is like the first line of defense for classroom management. Now, in special education, we know that you can have the most beautifully designed activity lesson, and if students come in and they've had a difficult day on the bus, or like Patrick said, asked, how was your weekend? Well, what if a student has disclosed to you that they're food insecure, and on the weekend they don't get to eat as much food at home, and that school is really where they get two primary meals a day? So understanding, and that kind of goes back to the relationship piece, but in addition to being organized, and Belkis can tell you, I'm not an organized person necessarily in my personal life, but I work really hard at it in my professional life. So making sure that I am absolutely ready for the day when I'm teaching. And then second to that, doing like individual check-ins with students, whether it's some teachers will do like they greet them at the door. And I did greeting at the door when I was a high school teacher, because we had to monitor the halls anyway. So then it became part of my daily routine. Hey, how's it going today? How was first period? How was whatever they were coming in? What'd you have for lunch today? Asking them those personal questions. And it can take less than like 15 seconds a student. And that helps to establish as they're coming in. And it gives you a pulse of their attitude and or approach to that day. If someone comes in kind of sulking, head down, doesn't answer your question, that might give you a heads up that there may be something going on. And then sometimes adjustments would happen. Like I was not opposed to making adjustments to my instruction based on individual student need. If I knew that a student seemed like they needed a little bit of a break, I would say, hey, for the bell ringer today, why don't you just serve as my helper, and I'm going to have you erase the board for me, and you don't have to do the bell ringer today, if I knew that was a student who sometimes needed a break. So being organized, responding to individual kind of shifts in demeanor, level of participation and engagement, and also recognizing that sometimes you need to have multiple layers of classroom management. So in our co-taught classroom, we did a lot of lab work. And so there's some safety pieces associated with lab work. So at the high school setting, we did do group contingencies where the labs would do a peer review of how each other did in the lab for safety, as well as the procedures of the lab. And then each lab group got to earn points each week. And so then they were able to achieve rewards based on the points. And as Jennifer said, there are high school kids who love stickers. They love a prize box. They love a little piece of token, candy, those kinds of things. High school kids are like, they may act like they're not down with it, but they really are, and they do appreciate it. And then we also had different things set up for individual students, like making sure I really, as a teacher, if it wasn't a student on my caseload, I really understood the behavior plan and what my role was to respond to those things. So I think, but that all goes back to being organized and ready, I think.
Yeah, Tracy, I just want to piggyback on what you said because that was my same mantra when I was in the classroom as well, is that I needed to make sure everything was structured. Kids knew exactly what was coming next. And a big thing for me in the classroom, whether it was general education or special education, was explicitly teaching my expectations. Because my expectations might be very different from what the children perceive them as. And that's a me issue. That's not a child issue, right? So if I'm asking them to do specific things, we're going to model it. We're going to do it over and over again. So it's to our liking and the way we want our classroom to run. For my students that were more challenged behaviorally, I'd make those accommodations for them. Maybe they need a peer partner. Maybe they need constant reinforcement. Maybe we're walking from one place to another. And right now they're only able to stay in part of the line. So I find a place in line where they can have those wiggles and movement, and that's safe for them because that's what they need. So really it's about meeting students where they are and structuring your classroom in a way that can meet the needs of all of your different students, whether that's visuals or regular verbal reinforcement, or having your kids right up front with you that you know need that extra level of care, and that proximity is doing it for them. So I know I'm kind of going on to other parts, but I mean really explicitly teaching so that everybody has a clear understanding of what your expectations are, so that when issues do arise, you can go back to what you modeled and we practice and we start over again. So I hope that that's helpful too.
I was going to share about one of the things in terms of in terms of motivating students and encouraging, I guess, positive behavior in juvenile detention is I did do and implemented an incentive system and had very clear rules. And the big thing there was making sure I worked with all the other teachers who were teaching, so we all kind of held hopefully somewhat to the same standard. You try, but and that was really, I think, one of the most positive things in terms of the motivation, the behavior that I saw, and we had rewards for that. Those were individual rewards, but students really responded well to that. And we also we did the rewards. I was trying to think. Yeah, I also incentivize, I guess, individually our post assessments. And speaking of stickers, so we did have like individual sticker chart for that, which students were really well motivated by. And they would ask, why don't I have a sticker? And I was like, oh, well, you missed a lot of times because there was inconsistent attendance, court dates. And it was like, oh, well, you missed this. So they would be asking me to complete their post assessments because they wanted, to show their progress in the course. And that was the other thing I was thinking about in terms of being flexible, like you kind of mentioned, Tracy, is that so we had a point system, and technically there could be like a consistent, this is the cutoff, but really every week it was, I had a chart, like a stacked chart, and we would look at, okay, well, who has the most points this week? And it was relative rewards rather than anything like set in stone, like this is the cutoff or anything, because there would be harder weeks and things that they were going through and traumas. So it was something that was somewhat flexible too. I think a lot of it too. So being organized, like you said, Tracy, but also being flexible too, like you reflected. I think too of when I did. As a district coordinator going into classrooms. And it is interesting, especially because as a teacher, sometimes you feel like you've been really clear about what the expectations are. But then, especially observing to support a student, and you'll see, I didn't understand necessarily as an observer what exactly a teacher wanted, or something that was really big too, like you said, Robin, and with being explicit with expectations is sometimes even directions. I've noticed or I've seen, and I've probably done myself, maybe having not so clear directions, or like, those wouldn't you like to push your chair in? And, just being clear, push your chair in made a really big impact, honestly, in my teaching. It was something I learned in my teacher training, and it was something I saw, especially with some of our students with disabilities receiving special education services, where teachers weren't always clear, and that, clear is kind, as Brene Brown says. And I definitely agree with that, Robin. Like that clarity removes a lot of behavior too.
I'm just going to throw in a couple things. If it comes out, coming back to me, Belfast. You see me? Okay.
Yeah, I can see you. You're good.
Just really, routines are always big for me. Having kids know what to expect in a routine and keep the routines as basic as possible, but also to let kids know how much time is left in a routine in a particular topic or situation that you're in. So they can kind of monitor that a little bit. And I don't want to get into a philosophical discussion about right and left brain, but I also believe that kids that are, right brain have a little more trouble with routines and all the things we're talking about than a left brain kid who really likes rules and situations and knows what to expect. So I might give that right brain kid a little bit more time and a little more stricter guidance.
Okay. I'm going to move us to the next one, and please feel free to use your what you think is the best one. But I think of this as can you describe a time you responded to a challenging behavior in a way that you were not proud of and what you learned from that? And I can start with one that's a little bit lighter, I guess. Um, Speaking of like routines, I learned that how important building systems were in a classroom, and not just like making sure you have things ready ahead of time. The building systems also meant having procedures in place and knowing exactly how to follow through with your own procedures, because a lot of the times they don't exist. You have to create them on your own. And we had in the high school setting, Ginevra and I had students coming in and out. It was resourced. It was really hard to keep track of everybody. And we created a system, and the system did work. However, we printed, it was like they had to go get like we created a little sheet and they had to get signed off by their gen ed teacher to come get permission to work with us. And the issue was we printed them on green paper. And for the rest of that year, no matter what color the paper was on, the kids called it their green card. And we were like, that's not what we wanted. It's not what we're trying to show you guys at all. Sorry. And it just stuck real hard. And it was sometimes what we learned was like part of that worked. What worked in that system was this. What didn't work was this. And what we're definitely never going to do again is print it on green paper, is what we learned. But I would love to know from you all how did you respond to a challenging behavior and what did you learn from that?
I might tell a real quick funny story. As a superintendent, I was going and interviewing for another superintendency, and they said, "What's the one thing that you kind of messed up on?" And you don't want to admit all your faults when you're interviewing. So I said, "Well, I can remember I got all my principals together and we set the time schedule for all the schools. And we were all excited because we did this for the first time. However, what I forgot is I forgot to tell the transportation department. So the kids weren't going to get there if we didn't tell the transportation department. So it's kind of like it always tells me make sure you've covered all your bases. So when you have a system in place or you're trying to create one, make sure that you have a chart that shows you that you are communicating, a little communication chart. That's probably not related to behavior, but it was modifying my behavior, not theirs.
I will share. Sometimes I think it's important to hear, especially from, we have a crew here with a cumulative, probably 50 plus years, 60 plus years of teaching experience. And that can be daunting for a new teacher to think about, well, I'm probably going to mess up all the time, right? But I think, so I think it's important to talk about like sometimes when we need to learn ourselves because it's constantly evolving. Like I'm still learning as a higher ed professional how to improve my practice as an educator. But when I transitioned from kindergarten to high school, it was not only a culture shock of where I was teaching in the environment and the community, but also really different, right? Like little kids express challenging behavior through sometimes tantruming and or throwing or hitting. Um, maybe the worst, I mean, I know that young children can use swear words or cuss words, but, high school kids are much more likely to cuss somebody out or call someone a really hurtful name. And a lot of behavior management texts are going to say things like, you always keep an even voice and you never raise if someone's at a level 100, you're staying at a level 10, right? But the reality is we are humans, teachers, principals, everybody is a human. And we have to recognize when where our threshold is rising, and know when to take a step back. And so that relates to my story. I had a very challenging group of high school, one cohort, and I was with them for 4 years, freshman through high school, all of their math courses. There were 17 boys and 2 girls in this cohort, and they pretty much were in class together all the time. If they had either an inclusion co-teaching class, a para-supported inclusion class, or a pull-out resource class, like in my math classroom. So they knew each other very well, and they knew how to push each other's buttons very well. And there was this group of 5 boys who kept using an inappropriate word wrong. Like they were using it as like an adjective, and that wasn't the word. And it was every time I tried multiple different ways. We were doing things like, if I don't hear this word today at all, like tomorrow we're going to have X as a snack or whatever. Like there were lots of things that I put in place to try to stop the behavior. I even tried some planned ignoring, but that was one of the most difficult things I've ever done. So if someone tells you just ignore behavior, you may want to question how long they've been in the classroom, because ignoring a behavior from 5 17-year-old boys is near impossible, especially when they pick up on the fact that you are ignoring them. So anyway, planned ignoring has to be instituted really, really carefully and in the right environment. So it got to the point where I was co-teaching with a geometry teacher who had been teaching for 50 years, literally 50 years. And so she had been teaching a very, very long time, and they started calling her this. And she said, "Oh, is that a new nickname, like a slang term?" And she thought it was a positive. And that was it. Like to me, the disrespect was at my limit. So I asked the boys to go across the hall, excuse me, not across the street, across the hall to an empty classroom. And instead of staying at a level 10, I probably was at a level 200, which in and of itself, I think was shocking for them, because I was not one to get really upset or raise my voice. But I was not proud of myself in that moment, because I knew that in a way, I was giving them the exact behavior that they were looking for, right? Like some of our kids ask for behavior or ask for attention in really inappropriate ways. I was giving them a heck of a lot of attention. Those 5 boys got me alone for 30 minutes of that class period. So I was not proud of that. But what I did learn is that we all have to understand our limits, especially when it comes to kids who push buttons. And we need to understand that there's a context for their behavior and why they're doing that. We may not agree with it, we may not understand it completely, but there is a context. And when, as an educator, we need a break sometimes, then we need to take that break. So I had a co-teacher in that classroom. I should have known that I should have said, you know what, I need to really run to the restroom. And I had another adult in the room, and I could do that so I could step away from the situation and then approach it differently with that group of boys. We eventually stopped using the word. When I made them look up what the word really meant, then they realized they were using it wrong. Then they were kind of embarrassed, but that's like another story. And no, I will not tell you what the word is, especially because this is recorded for your class, Belkis. But yes, I'll tell you privately, and you can tell your class if you want. But yeah, so knowing your own limits too, and understanding that you are human, because you can't be superhuman all the time.
Yeah.
Tracy, I think maybe we're in sync with our responses, because so much of what you just said is literally what I had planned to say. But I also want to say, like, in terms of the biggest mistake I've made, and this is probably some of the best advice I can give to new teachers, is do not argue with kids. They will win. They are relentless. They have a threshold for arguing more than we will ever have. So if they are baiting you to argue with them, don't take the bait. Redirect, ignore if it's appropriate. But that is one of the mistakes I made very early on. I thought, hey, I've got this. I've got behavior. I understand it. And there was one kid, and he just, for some reason, I still can't identify it to this day. He knew how to get under my skin, and it worked. And it derailed all of the skills that I had had because this one, I let it invade my emotional force field. That's what I would call it, my force field. And so I engaged in the argument with him, and that was a one-time thing, and I never did that again, because in engaging with him, not only did I give him that power, the attention, but I also modeled to the other students, right? So it took me probably a month to get my classroom management back to what I would consider my baseline, because I gave the student that attention that they wanted. Um, and in my reflection of that, I had a paraeducator in the room. I was teaching mild mod STC. And especially as I learned and learned how to utilize the people that I work with, exactly, take a break. Find if it means you turning around for a moment and just taking a few deep breaths to get grounded so that you can get that clarity in your mind of what your next step is, then take it. But that, to me, that's one of the best advices that I can give to our new teachers, is because kids are really looking for that. And if they can't get positive attention, they look for the negative attention, and they're good at it because it's worked for them. So that's really something that I'm very tuned into now, not only with children, but adults. We just don't argue.
And I want to just throw in one little tip that is a little bit of a practical tip. I did have a behavior, or I had a folder that I used. It was sealed, that when I knew a behavior was escalating to like that redirection, I had another teacher in the building, and so this was a plan for both of us, where I would say actually to the student who was the one who was like maybe pushing your buttons, trying to start an argument, being contextually inappropriate, whatever we want to call it, I would ask that student to deliver the folder to that teacher. And it was like on the other side of the classroom. They got a break, I got a break, and then they came back. And generally they could come back in and we would reset and say, okay, we're on number this now on the activity that we're doing. So can you please work with this person to get caught up, and then so that's just one tip for new teachers too. Like if you don't have another adult in the room like I did or Robin did with a para, that's one way to kind of break up a potential conflict, is asking them to deliver something to someone else.
I'll add to that one because we were with older students, high school, and we could trust them a little bit differently. But very often, we would say, like, could you go to the third floor and get me water? The third floor has the best water in the whole school. So, like, can you please go and get to the third floor? And it gave us just a couple of minutes, gave them whatever they needed to burn off. And then we had so many water bottles. And if the water bottle was already full, it was like, well, that's old water. Can you give me like new water? And it helped a lot, I think, sometimes. Everybody just kind of needed a couple minutes there. All right. I know we're running short on time, so I'm going to finish off with one question here. What is one mindset, tool, or practice that has helped you, or that you would recommend, that has helped you stay grounded or hopeful, especially on those really tough days with students? And those, I will also want to hear those. I'll keep that in mind. Jennifer, do you want to start off?
I know I was thinking about, well, I was still thinking about the other question that you had.
Oh, good.
And I do want to share too, in terms of I just had an incident when I was a district coordinator. A student, they called him last minute to support, and he left the classroom and then was like in this like little vestibule where I was like, is he gonna leave the school? Because this was a student who was known for elopement. And I kind of like was panicked because I'm trying to remember, I think I may have been pregnant at the time, but I was just like, oh my gosh, am I gonna have to like leave the school? And I can't remember if I texted or called, but in the end I just was like, okay, I'm just gonna, I remember they were like, just keep an eye. I was like, I texted or called some of the people who were more familiar with the student. But in the end, it was kind of one of those scenarios, was like, trust your gut too, where it was like, I mean, I kind of was panicked in the moment, but in the end, it was like what I thought to do was the right thing to do. And like everything was really fine. I was just worried that he would elope. He didn't elope. I just stayed within proximity, and everything was fine. So kind of that trust your gut. And I feel like that maybe goes into too, like a mindset or tool too, like in terms of a lot of times you may not know like all the specific things that are leading to a thought that you're having or a gut feeling, but a lot of times, your natural inclination can be correct um, in terms of behavior. with all of, especially given all of, the coursework you're doing now and all the experience that you have, all kind of feeds into those instincts that you have. And I think the break taking that Tracy and Robin alluded to too. I think about that. Um, and I think too, in terms of staying grounded or hopeful, I think, we talked about relationship building with students, but I think a big thing as a new teacher is to build those relationships. I think about Miss Mitchell, who I taught with in juvenile detention, and her wisdom and her knowledge and just so much of that. And she still sends me, pictures of her grandkids. And I think that is like kind of a tool or a practice that definitely helps you stay hopeful when you're, connecting with your peers and, connected in a common goal and a common shared values around educating students, especially students with disabilities receiving special education services.
Yeah, and I would agree, Ginevra, as well, that I really think, leaning into the people that you work with. And what I used to do, especially when we had really hard days when I was a principal, and it was like one crisis after another, and we would kind of, we dealt with things through humor because a lot of the times that was the best way to do it. But we would always, on days like those, we would have a debrief at the end of the day. And maybe it was 15 or 20 minutes just to kind of talk about any feelings anybody had, any thoughts, anything we might do differently, kind of how we want to approach the next day after a day like that. And everybody's definition of crisis looks different, right? But you really lean into each other. And I think the other really big part is be kind to yourself. I think we as educators, we want to help people. We are in a helping profession. And when we see someone that we feel like we're not helping or they're not getting what they need from us, we tend to personalize that sometimes. And none of this is about us. This is stuff that kids are going through, and they're unmet needs that they don't know how to, articulate in a way that's healthy and not maladaptive. And so we need to be kind to ourselves. We need to be kind to those students, and we need to lean on the people that we know are going to support us and help us through that time. So I think that's the best advice I can give in terms of, that you're going to have those really hard days. And once you have them, you're going to have them again. And they might be few and far between, and they might be for a straight week, whatever they are. But you need to have those self-care and your own coping strategies in place to support you through that.
Mine is kind of related to a funeral I went to one time, and they define wisdom as having common sense to an uncommon degree. And getting a teacher to understand that common sense is the most important thing you can carry. If you think somebody's going to be bothered by it, your administrator or a parent or an advocate or something, think twice before you maybe do it. So do that. The other thing is, in all my administrative meetings and even with my classes now, I always say at the end of it, what could we have done better? And it's a simple question. And so, you'd be surprised how many students will tell you what we could have done better. And they're smarter than we think they are. I know they're smarter than I am anyway. So just have common sense and think about how we could do it better. You can always try and do something a little bit better.
I think to add to that, one way that I tried to really bring this into the classroom, similar to kind of what Patrick was saying about, you can ask students like, what's one thing we could have done better today? I was trained when I taught elementary school in restorative practices. And so we did a lot of classroom circles. And if it was a tough day, we would end the day, like even if that meant it cut into literacy time or math time, we ended the day with a restorative circle. And it wasn't sweeping under the rug the bad, right? Like we don't want to discount anyone's feelings, but trying to end the day on whether it be proactive strategies, like Patrick said, like what is one thing we can do better tomorrow, but also really focusing on like the moments of good that happen. Because even on a really tough day, things can be good. And there can be good things that happen on a difficult day. And so as a classroom, we would kind of brainstorm. And I did take that to the high school level, which was really hard for high school kids to have a restorative circle. You know, we literally would sit in a circle on the floor and they'd be like, we're not in kindergarten like your old class. I was like, I know, but we still need to talk about this. And then there's another little piece of advice that I was given by a colleague. And there's actually, I think there's a whole metaphor. So this is probably where she got it, but I'm going to credit her with it. But in gardening, oftentimes you plant marigolds with other plants because it helps them thrive. It helps to keep away bugs, it helps them thrive. And so the analogy is to find people and things that help you thrive. So similar to whether it be self-compassion or a hobby or a colleague who can support you, but you really want to find like a marigold in your life. And you are often probably the marigold for others, but also making sure that you have marigolds in your lives that can help you thrive and think about who you serve as a marigold for, whether it be your students, your colleagues, but we all need someone that can help us thrive and bring out the best in who we are and remind us of who we are as educators. Because like Belka said, it's not an easy job. It's really hard. And I'm not going to placate to you and say, oh, remember your why. That's not what this is. This is, you're doing the difficult work and you need to remember that. And if it's a really tough day and if you need to go home and binge Netflix for 6 hours and not grade one paper, that's okay too, because the papers will be there tomorrow. So.
Thank you.
Sorry, I got a little yappy there, Belkis.
No, I like it because I think that's a great way to end, to be honest. You may all know, but I am a big proponent of the work is always there tomorrow. There's never been a day in my life where the work wasn't there tomorrow. No matter how much I work today, tomorrow, I guarantee you there's going to be another 100 emails to look at, and I still got to write that paper thing, and I still got to grade more things. But today I can end at 5 p.m. because that's the cutoff I gave myself, and I will pick back up tomorrow. I'm a big proponent of, and people think I'm like wild because of it. And please also become wild yourselves. The work will be there tomorrow. I'm going to stop recording here. I want to also thank you all so much. If you want to give a goodbye wave to students.